Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. Today, I have an opportunity to learn a lot from a person who's a very special guest, Richard Allen Greene, Chicagoan, who is also currently serving as CNN's Jerusalem bureau chief, which is a fascinating position. He holds awards. He has the Edward R. Murrow Award for CNN's exploration on anti-Semitism in Europe, the National Association of Black Journalists Award of Excellence for the network's look into racism in Britain, the DuPont Columbia Award for coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which means that he's really on top of everything. Not just that, he's been working at CNN since 2008, and before that was a Politico, BBC, and he speaks a lot of languages, including Czech, Spanish, and as I understand, a smattering of Hebrew, which hopefully is getting a little bit better now he's in Yerushalayim. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate this.
It's my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. And please don't test me on my...
I'm not going to test you. That was for your Hebrew school teachers to do. It's not for me. Just to start really at the beginning, the experiences that you've had really span so many important things that are important to us as a Jewish community. What was your exploration on anti-Semitism in Europe that you received the award for? The Murrow Award is a major award.
It is, and thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, it's, I suppose, exciting and important and depressing, I guess, if we're going to start off talking about anti-Semitism. Look, for years, I've been living in Europe for about 30 years now. And for years, my father has been saying, aren't you worried about anti-Semitism in Europe? I read about it in the Jewish press in America all the time. And I shrug and I say, Dad, you know, it's not that bad. Don't worry about it. Over the past 5, 6, 7 years, though, I started thinking, and let's not tell him this, perhaps my father knows what he's talking about. Colleagues of mine at CNN raised the question in discussions in our London bureau, is anti-Semitism something that we need to be paying more attention to? There's anecdotal evidence, there are organizations that collect data, how many anti-Semitic attacks, how many attacks on synagogues, how much anti-Semitic abuse is on Twitter and other, hostile places online. I've done a lot of political coverage in my career, and so one of the things that I dabble in is polling, and CNN decided that rather than just collecting all of the anecdotal stories, we would actually polls across 7 countries in Europe to see what ordinary people actually thought, and we would test them by putting out some various anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes, and ask how many people really believed them. So in 2018, we polled more than 7,000 people across 7 countries in Europe, and we asked questions like how much they know about the Holocaust, who is responsible for anti-Semitism, is it true that Jews have too much influence in entertainment, in the media, in business and finance, in government? And I will be honest, I was shocked to find the levels of agreement that people had with anti-Semitic tropes, which I thought should really have been put to bed generations ago. I don't remember the numbers at the moment. This was 5 years ago, but a surprising number of people blamed the behavior of Jewish people for anti-Semitism. A surprising number of people said they knew little or nothing about the Holocaust. Particularly among young people in France. A depressing number of people said Jews had too much influence in business and finance. And so studying it, I don't want to say scientifically, but a little bit more rigorously, we did discover that a lot of beliefs that we thought were things of the past are still current in Europe. So it was based on a big poll, and then we rolled out this information across multiple platforms. We did digital stories about it with graphics and so on. We sent correspondence to different countries. We had someone go to Auschwitz. We had someone meet a family that was considering emigrating from France because of their personal experiences. And we unrolled towards the end of 2018 this big survey across 7 countries in Europe, and some, quite frankly, depressing findings.
And I assume we haven't seen any great rays of hope since then, that actually there have been more challenges?
Again, the anecdotal evidence continues to be depressing. I think it is important to put all of this in context. But there are organizations which continue to monitor these kind of events. The physical attacks and the verbal abuse, we know, tends to be correlated with violence in the Middle East. Attacks of all kinds on Jews in Europe, and I would guess in the perhaps not the United States, I haven't studied it, I shouldn't say, but certainly in Europe, when there's violence in the Middle East, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that does tend to produce a response against Jews in Europe.
And you moved over to Jerusalem, where you're the bureau chief, and you're the bureau chief of CNN, which sometimes is criticized for not necessarily providing a pro-Israel stance. There was a time where people wanted to boycott CNN, even from within the Jewish community, much like you find sometimes with the New York Times. Do you find any challenges being the CNN bureau chief and being a proud member of the Jewish community?
So those are two separate things. I would say I am in Jerusalem as a journalist, as a CNN bureau chief. I am not there as a Jew, and I have a responsibility to cover the news. And look, there is a lot of responsibility on the bureau chief. It is to present what we see as an accurate, balanced, truthful, and complete as possible picture of what's going on there. I can't remember the exact word you used, that CNN was not supportive of Israel. Or it is not the job of CNN to be supportive of Israel. It's the job of CNN to report the facts with context and history and understanding. I've only been bureau chief about a month, but I've been going back and forth for the past several years because there's been so much going on. And I arrived just before the election on the 1st of November to run our CNN election coverage there, the election that returned Benjamin Netanyahu and his ultra-Orthodox and ultra-nationalist allies to power. And as I was arriving at the airport at Ben Gurion, I handed over my passport, and the passport officer said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm a journalist. I'm here to report for CNN on the election." And she said to me, "I hope you'll make us look good." And I said, "It's really not up to me to make you look good in the election. That's up to you." And she laughed. She got it. It is our responsibility to tell the truth as we see it.
And the truth as you see it today in Israel, and with the protests and the judicial reform, are you as a journalist as worried as some members of the press or the opinion pages are worried about the future of democracy in Israel?
So let me pause and say one of the things that CNN has chosen to do is to not use the word reform. We talk about judicial overhaul, we talk about judicial changes, but we had a high-level discussion about this. We felt that the word reform implies positive connotations, and I'm prepared to say objectively, I think there are concerns about changing the system of checks and balances in Israel. And you can say that these changes are necessary. The Supreme Court has become too powerful, or the system of appointing judges perpetuates a particular group of people as judges. These are the arguments that Netanyahu and his allies use to say the system needs to be changed. So we would say change, we would say overhaul. And we would report, and we do report, that these are the reasons that Netanyahu and his allies say they want to change the system, to eliminate the power of the Supreme Court effectively to declare laws unconstitutional, with the caveat that Israel does not have a constitution, but to an American audience, to say unconstitutional or in contravention of the basic laws. There is an argument for it. The UJA was having an annual meeting in Jerusalem not long after I arrived. Netanyahu has been saying, among other things, these changes would bring us more into line with Canada, would make us more like Canada. The former Justice Minister of Canada is a Reformed Jew who was in London, was in Jerusalem at the time, and he said to the conference, this would make us nothing like Canada. There's nothing at all like Canada in this overhaul. And so we report, we report all of this context. I've been to the demonstrations. I have met Israeli politicians who support the changes, who oppose the changes, who see room for compromise. President Herzog, you'll know, has intervened several times dramatically. We have covered what he says about it, what Netanyahu says about it, what Yair Levin says about it, Yaniv Levin. The first demonstration that I went to, this is the Justice Minister, who is one of the proponents of these changes. One of the protesters had a big sign that said, Levin, live out. So there is a big, as you know, a big and vocal opposition, and we'll see what happens.
As a journalist, are you allowed to have an opinion on this, or in public, or this is all something you have to keep private to be able to maintain your position of just reporting the facts?
So after 15 years at CNN and 6 years at the BBC before that, I am very hesitant to express my own opinions in public, partly because I don't think it's appropriate, partly because the longer I spend in journalism and the more stories I cover, the shakier my opinions on things become. When I was a young journalist, I was very certain I was right about pretty much everything. I'm not as convinced about that now, and so I am reluctant to express opinions in public.
Well, that's why someone once told me that's why when you get older, you turn gray. Not because of worries, but because you discover that the world is gray and not black and white anymore.
I'm going to steal that.
Oh, please feel free without attribution. But in the meantime, can you give us a little background? You grew up in the Chicago area. How did you get all the way to be in Europe for 30 years? In the BBC, you were in Prague for 7 years. You worked also for Politico in Washington, I assume in Washington, D.C. for Politico. And
Washington, that's right.
Then went back overseas again. How does that happen?
If I could explain it, really, it's a series of lucky accidents. And one of the things I love about the job that I had in London at CNN for about a dozen years is I spent a lot of time talking to young journalists and journalism students and telling them the story of my career, which involves, I graduated from college, Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. I graduated in 1991. The Iron Curtain fell while I was in college. The Berlin Wall, the Velvet Revolution, the end of communism in the roundtable discussions in Poland, the execution of the Ceausescus in Romania was all in ferment when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. And so Prague seemed like an exciting place to go. When I graduated, I went in the summer of 1991, just after the short-lived coup that deposed Gorbachev. I was able to get plane tickets because of that coup. Flights had been sold out before that, and the day after the coup, my travel agent called me and said there are now plane tickets to Czechoslovakia, and I bought them. And the coup was over a matter of days later, so I felt like I'd guessed right on that one. I moved to Prague without any very specific plan. I was lucky to fall in with a group of young Americans who were starting up a newspaper called the Prague Post. I ended up working there for a number of years, 8 years altogether in Prague. I met the woman who is now my wife. She's British. She moved me to London, where I ended up working for the BBC for about 6 years, as you said. While I was working for the BBC, I got a short-term posting in Washington, D.C. in the spring of 2006. That's a rotating one-year position. And as soon as I arrived in 2006, my boss said to me, it's time to start writing about the presidential election in 2008. And I said, don't you think it's too soon? And he said, get to work on it. And I very quickly realized, in fact, I was late to the game in 2006. And so 2006, 2007, I did a lot of political coverage out of Washington, D.C. a little bit of Barry Bonds because I'm a baseball obsessive, and that was the story at the time. And the spring of 2007 came around, and for months we had been debating in the BBC Washington Bureau. There was a young senator from Illinois who seemed like he might be tempted to run for president, and we debated, did he have the experience? Did he have the backing? Was he actually going to declare? And right around the time that my one-year posting in Washington came to an end, Barack Obama declared that he was going to run for president in 2008. And the posting ended, and my boss said to me, time to come back to London. And I said, you know, this Obama guy seems interesting, and I think it would be fun to stay in Washington and cover him. I think this guy's got, I think he's got something about him. And they said, well, that may be, but your post was for a year and somebody else wants the job now. So come on back to London. And went out for drinks with a friend. And they said, oh, they're telling me that I got to go back home. And she said, some friends of mine are starting up a website about politics. Maybe you should talk to them. That turned out to be Politico. I had an interview with them. I was an online journalist at the time. They were looking for a web editor. I spent a year with Politico. Then in 2008, we were trying to hire somebody away from CNN to work for us at Politico. He ended up hiring me away to work for CNN instead. I did the 2008 election. My tiny claim to fame at CNN is on the election night 2008. I am the guy who wrote the words, Barack Obama has been elected president of the United States. Wasn't my decision. The political editor of CNN was on a headset. I was the typist, but I typed the words, Barack Obama. He said, CNN is calling it for Obama. I typed it.
Wow.
At that point, we had been in London, in Washington for about 2.5 years. We had a young family. My wife is British. The kids were just of an age to be starting school. We had been there much longer than we planned to be. And so we moved back to London, and I was there until I moved to Jerusalem about a month ago.
Wow. So a lot of good luck, a lot of good talent would bring you to the place itself.
And this is what I say to young journalists. I could never have planned this career. I don't think anybody could have planned for it to work out this way, but there is definitely an advantage to being open to opportunities when they present themselves. If something falls in your lap, take it.
And being the bureau chief in Jerusalem, is it different than being a bureau chief in London or in some other European city? Besides the location, obviously.
The weather is better in Jerusalem than it is in London. It is very intense. It's nonstop, and it is a fairly small bureau. We have one correspondent. We have one photojournalist, what used to be called a cameraman. We now call them photojournalists because they're not all men. We have 2.5 producers, one of whom is Palestinian, one of whom is a Sabra, born and raised in Israel, and one is an Israeli Olah who's been there since 1985 and sounds like he just stepped off the plane from Zimbabwe. And as a group, the 5 or 6 of us, depending on who's on shift at a time, need to cover the judicial overhaul protests, whatever Bezalel Smotrich says about the Palestinians, whenever Itamar Ben-Gvir decides to go walkabout on the Temple Mount, whatever violence is taking place in the West Bank, whatever rockets are being fired out of Gaza, any speeches that President Herzog makes. And then on the side, we also like to cover daily life in Israel where we can. We've been working on a story about a Palestinian reporter who works for an Israeli television station. We had Richard Quest, our business editor, came and presented a show out of Tel Aviv because he was hosting a conference there. We had a features shoot about meat being grown in labs and sold for commercial use. So it's a lot of work for a group of 5 or 6 or 7 of us, particularly when one is brand new and still learning the ropes.
And is it normal that they have such a small bureau, or is CNN's bureau considered larger among the international groups?
So I'm speaking to you from the very end of a training course I was on today. A correspondent for another network, a British network, was on the course with me. He's part of a group of 3 covering Jerusalem from there, and he actually covers more than just Israel and the Palestinian territories. Many of the teams are even smaller than the CNN group. We're a medium-sized bureau for an international group in Jerusalem these days.
And going back to your question about the overhaul versus reform, are those common conversations that take place on language that's going to be used?
This is one of the main things that I'm involved in. Is we choose our words very, very carefully, and there is a great deal of debate in the office, and then there's a department at CNN. We have a group of senior editors called the Row. They have the final say on everything that is published or broadcast on CNN, the choice of wording, the legal department, the standards department, and so I'm in constant conversation with them about the words we use, the context we include. I write guidance, which the entire network must follow, which is slightly terrifying. You may remember at the beginning of the year, in January, there was a shooting outside of a synagogue on a Friday night in an area called Neve Yaakov.
Right.
It is, Israelis would say that is in Jerusalem. The government of Israel would say it is in Jerusalem. And I had people all across the network saying, is Neve Yaakov a settlement? And I had to make a ruling based on the geography and discussions with colleagues. Do we call Neve Yaakov a settlement? How do we describe this area? It's outside the Green Line. It was captured by Israel in 1967 in the Six-Day War. Do we simply say it's a settlement? Do we simply say it's a neighborhood of Jerusalem? No. And we said it's both. Israel would call it a neighborhood of Jerusalem, and Palestinians and much of the international community would say it's a settlement. So those are the kind of discussions that we have all the time.
So what does CNN refer to as what we'll call the Temple Mount?
My standard turn of phrase is something elegant like the Jerusalem holy site known to Jews as the Temple Mount and to Muslims as the Haram al-Sharif or noble sanctuary.
Wow. And these,
it's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. And this is the way you're able to maintain that balance for CNN?
Yes, I think balance is a good way of describing. We are not going to satisfy everybody, but it's not our job to satisfy everybody. It is to attempt to be as clear as we can about how the two sides, or I'm used to talking about the two sides, but I think, you know, what's going on now, we have Israeli versus Israeli, we have Palestinian versus Palestinian, we have Israeli versus, all the different sides. We're just trying to represent them as fairly and accurately as we can.
And are you criticized by all sides, or is it? And sometimes I think the way to figure out if you're doing the right thing is if the people on the right and the people on the left are both not happy.
Certainly the years that I was at the BBC, they always said if we're getting criticized by both sides, then we're probably doing something right. I think that there's a lot of sense to that. But I also think it can be a bit easy to say that. I do try to pay attention to criticism that seems to me to be coming from a sane and serious place. That eliminates a lot of the criticism that I get. A lot of it is they are polemicists, or they're angry, or they're just never gonna be satisfied with whatever because of the perspective that they bring to the table. But there is legitimate criticism out there, and just to say I'm getting criticized by both sides, so I must be okay, can be a little bit easy. So when I'm in a good frame of mind and healthy and well rested, I do try to look at the criticism and think, are they right? Do they have a point there? And sometimes they do. We change. We try to change with the times. You know, the Jerusalem that I move to a month ago is not even the same one that when I applied for the job 8 months ago. Things are very different.
And they will continue to be different. I think one of the best ways of understanding the organization of the Jewish world is to remember that it's disorganized. We don't have that nice clean box for everything, and things continue to move. In terms of your relationship, CNN's relationship with the Israeli press, is there collegial relationship? Are the journalists get together to sometimes fight, argue, and agree?
Certainly, we have CNN as a media organization. We have professional relationships with the 3 main Israeli television channels, 11, 12, and 13. In the sense that we have contractual relationships. We share material with them. The 6 of us cannot be everywhere in Israel and the Palestinian territories at once. So we do use video and occasionally editorial, with the demonstrations kick off in Tel Aviv and we're in Jerusalem. If somebody has got the photograph or the video of the horse charge, we certainly use that as a way of telling the story. I would like to get to know more Israeli journalists and Palestinian journalists to be able to have more of those kind of conversations. I'm a member of the Foreign Press Organization, so that is a forum for discussing these kind of questions as well. With time, I will learn more from all of my colleagues.
If you raise the banner as a former Chicagoan, Yaakov Katz of the Jerusalem Post is another former Chicagoan as well. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't
And
mention,
we have him on air from time to time, as a matter of fact.
Okay. I would be remiss if I didn't mention, people might be wondering how I was able to really get you to be part of this opportunity. It's because your father is a very active member of the Ma'ot Chitim committee. This Sunday, by the way, is the big Sunday of deliveries. I don't think you'll be available to help out, but he needs a lot of helpers to come out there. But he was the one who mentioned, my son is the bureau chief in Jerusalem. So I do thank him as well for that connection. We have just a couple of minutes left. In those couple of minutes, what's the biggest challenge, do you think, being the bureau chief in Jerusalem?
Finding time to sleep.
It's 24/7. It's 24/7.
It is 24/7. It is 24/7. I am part of a big team and I work with a big team, but ultimately, as a quality control and as a fairness and balance, anything that CNN publishes or broadcasts needs to go through the Jerusalem Bureau if it touches the Israeli-Palestinian story in any way. So the small team of us are constantly not only producing our own material, but reviewing everything that CNN does before publication or broadcast. I know that I'm inviting hate mail and complaints by doing that, by saying it's ultimately up to me. It's not just up to me, but the sheer volume of work is exhausting.
You mean when Smotrich was in the United States this past week, that reporting also got passed through you? I don't know if it was reported on, but that would be passed through you?
Some of it. We would want to, for example, his comment that the West Bank Palestinian village of Huwara should be erased, which he made on camera in Israel to a journalist in a calm moment at a conference. He apologized for that comment when he was in the United States. And my boss's boss came to me and went, "Oh, Smotrich has apologized." And my job was to say, he's apologized several times before. We can report that he apologized, but we need to know this is not, it's not groundbreaking news that he's apologized. It's our job to know that context and to tell the network when he travels. He said it and he apologized twice before, and now he's apologizing in Washington, D.C. at the Israel Bonds Conference.
So how long is the posting typically in the Jerusalem Bureau?
It's a 3-year assignment.
A 3-year assignment. So you'll have 3 years of excitement, hopefully peaceful excitement, but excitement because being in Jerusalem is always exciting.
And I should say my predecessor did 2 3-year assignments, so we'll see how things go.
Okay, and Passover is coming. I hope that you'll be able to spend it in Yerushalayim. That's a special opportunity. And I hope you'll be able to do a lot of things while you're there as the bureau chief, because we do need the information. And that's one of the things that I'm so grateful that you were willing to spend the time with us. Our time, however, is up. And so I do notice also in a lot of things you put out, it always says you're always available to speak to students. So I hope if you come back to Chicago, I also have a high school, Ida Crown Jewish Academy. I'd love to have you come and speak with our students as well, because what you do is so very important to the world, and how it happens is so very fascinating, your story. Thank you so very much, Richard. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks. It's been an honor to talk to you. Thanks very much.
Have a wonderful evening, and we'll have a great rest of our day as well.
Great. Thanks a lot.